Nice guys finish last. We've all heard this bitter punchline from someone who feels overlooked, underappreciated, or friend-zoned one too many times. It's supposed to be a complaint about how kindness gets punished and ruthlessness gets rewarded. But what if the cliche is only half the story? What if the real problem with nice guys isn't that they finish last, it's that they take everyone else down with them?
Life is a war. This is the Forge. Welcome to Steel and Scrolls.
Imagine a man so overflowing with kindness that he forgives murderers before they've repented. A man who pities a woman so deeply that he refuses to hold her accountable for her own self-destruction. A man whose limitless compassion excuses every crime, enables every catastrophe, and ultimately leaves a trail of ruined lives in his wake. He isn't some abstract idea. His name is Lev Mushkin, the hero of Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Idiot. In Dostoevsky's world, his boundless mercy doesn't save anyone. It strips them of responsibility. Worse, it strips them of agency, the very thing needed to make hard choices, confront their demons, and maybe, just maybe, redeem themselves. He was the nice idiot who ruined everyone's lives. Today, we'll be exploring how the nicest guy in all of literature becomes the most dangerous. His unlimited kindness eventually becomes some of the biggest sources of cruelty. Mishkin's forgiving love stands in stark contrast to Sonya's redemptive love from crime and punishment. I explore Sonya and how her love redeemed a murderer in a different video. Check out the link in the description. Sonya's dirty love leads to the redemption of a murderer, while Mishkin's ethereal love ends in a physical and psychological bloodbath. Let's get into it. Before we can analyze precisely why Mishkin's kindness took everyone down with him, we should look at what happened when Mishkin's radical innocence collided with the cynicism of 19th century Russia. The story begins with Mishkin returning to Russia from Switzerland, where he was treated for epilepsy. On the train ride back, he meets Parfyon Rogozhin, the man fueled by a dark, obsessive passion for a woman he barely knows called Nastasia Filipovna. He steals money from his father to buy her diamond earrings, and after his father passes away, he decides to use his inheritance to buy her hand in marriage. Rogozhin doesn't talk about Nastasia as someone to be loved or someone to build a life with, but rather a possession to be had at any and every cost. How does Mushkin respond to this? He embraces this troubled man as he would a brother. Later in the book, they exchange cross necklaces as one would one's own blood brother. In the Orthodox tradition, this ritual tied the two people together and was considered even more sacred than a biological bond. After arriving in St. Petersburg, Mishkin heads to the house of General Epanchin. Lizaveta Epanchin, the general's wife, is a distant relative of his. While waiting to see the general, Mishkin meets his secretary, Ganya Ivolgin. Ganya is a social climber who plans to marry Nastasia only for her large dowry that he will receive. He despises her for her reputation, but his hunger for status overpowers his disgust for her past. Upon showing Mishkin a photo of Nastasia, Mishkin breaks down in tears, moved by the suffering he sees in her eyes. He decides that she is a pure soul, despite her reputation as a fallen woman. He has fallen in love with a ghost, a version of her that does not exist outside of his imagination. He fetishizes her victimhood instead of recognizing her personal agency. Upon hearing that Nastasia Filipovna is hosting a birthday party at her apartment, Mishkin invites himself to the party. He felt an almost cosmic drawing to her, and based on this he decides to violate the laws of politeness and decorum to save her from the vultures circling the carcass of her life. This marks the opening of the most chaotic scene in the book. Ganya proposes to Nastasia with 75,000 rubles. Almost immediately after, Rogozhin shows up at the party and proposes to her with 100,000 rubles. In the heat of the moment, Mishkin presents a third option by also proposing to her. He does this to present a way out for her, showing her that she doesn't have to marry a man that hates her or a man that wishes to possess her. He tries to show her that she can marry a man who will treat her well in spite of her fallen past. Nastasia's self-destructive tendencies ultimately force her to accept Rogozhin's offer, and they leave the party along with Rogozhin's friends. A few months later, Mishkin visits Rogozhin at his family home in St. Petersburg. Nastasia is not present. Despite her absence, the entire conversation between the two men revolve around her. She is discussed as a problem to be solved. The irony of this is that Mishkin's benevolence towards her ends up treating her the same way everyone else does, not as a person with agency, but as someone to be fixed. It is during this visit that Mishkin and Rogozhin exchange crosses as brothers. Later that evening, as Mishkin returns to his hotel, Rogozhin meets him at the top of the dark steps with a knife, ready to kill him. Just as he is about to strike, an epileptic fit besieges Mishkin, and he lets out a supernatural scream. This seems to break Rogozhin's resolve, and he drops the knife and flees. Later, Mishkin recovers from his fit at a friend's summer house in a small resort town, Pavlovsk, just outside the city. All the city's elite relocated there for the summer, including Rogozhin and the Epanchins, the general who Mishkin went to visit at the beginning of the novel. It is here, on a green park bench, that Mishkin and Aglaya Epanchin gradually kindled a burgeoning romance in that summer. They were slowly moving towards marriage, much to her mother's chagrin. Mishkin had developed a reputation as a holy fool, and Mrs. Epanchin would not stand the idea of her daughter being married to a man who was mocked by the high society of St. Petersburg. The novel's climax comes when Mishkin and Aglaya meet Nastasia in a room in her lodgings in the resort town. Nastasia breaks down and forces Mishkin to choose between her and Aglaya. When Mishkin doesn't immediately choose Aglaya, she storms out of the room, leaving Mishkin to confront Nastasia. Nastasia eventually runs off with Rogozhin again, but this time she is murdered by him. Mishkin discovers the body in Rogozhin's house, and instead of confronting him about it or notifying the police, Mishkin sits with Rogozhin in the house and comforts him. The novel ends with Rogozhin being arrested and Mishkin returning to Switzerland for further treatment of his epilepsy, leaving a dead body and a ruined chance at happiness in his wake. What exactly was Mishkin's flaw? Was it that his ideals were too unrealistic to be useful in the modern world? There's a scene in the book where Mishkin sees a painting of Christ emerging from the tomb in Rogozhin's house. The painting is called The Body of the Dead Christ in the Tomb by Hans Holbein. Mishkin had this to say about the painting. A man's faith might be ruined by looking at that disgusting picture. This is representative of his beauty being too weak to face the ugliness of modernity. Mishkin represents a perfect, beautiful soul that refuses to treat anyone harshly, even those who deserve it. His beauty is a denial of the facts. He doesn't fall in love with Nastasia, he falls in love with his idea of her. Nastasia is clearly hell-bent on her own destruction, but he refuses to recognize this. He falls in love with his altruistic version of her, the damsel in distress. She was more than that, though. She was a damsel in distress, but the distress was self-imposed. Mishkin had multiple premonitions that Rogozhin was a dangerous man to be avoided at all costs. Even after narrowly avoiding being murdered by him, he refuses to treat Rogozhin stiffly. This may have come from a place of love, but is it truly love if it allows destruction? He refuses to set boundaries, and in doing so, he essentially hands Rogozhin the knife. How could things have ended differently if he had acted on his first instincts about Rogozhin on the train? Mishkin is obsessed with the idea of saving people, or rather, his idea of who the people are. There is something very noble about this. As we've seen in previous videos, loving someone involves dealing with their problems and helping them where you can. However, you can't really help someone without acknowledging the reality of their situation. Had Mishkin acknowledged Nastasia and Rogozhin's realities, he would have changed his approach towards them, and he would have been more effective in helping them. What does all of this mean for us today? Oftentimes, in an age where we are constantly being asked to care about everything around us, it seems like the morally appropriate thing to do. Each post on social media that we come across has to be given our full attention. Every story told requires all our righteous anger at the offender and total empathy for the victim. Our total and complete allegiance to every cause is demanded. However, as Mishkin showed us, caring about everyone and everything with an extraordinary zeal doesn't solve anything, and it achieves the opposite of help. Mishkin tried to focus his being on saving everyone around him, and eventually he ended up saving no one. To the contrary, he ended up ruining not only his own life, but the lives of those around him. Nastasia died, Rogozhin got sent to Siberia, and he broke Aglaya's heart. She eventually ended up in a marriage with a man who lied and manipulated her and estranged her from her family. The calls of social media to be morally outraged at every social justice issue isn't just ineffective, it works against the issues themselves. If we constantly give all our energy to infinite causes, we take away our time and resources from the finite causes of those around us. If I constantly focus my time on reading, posting, and talking about whichever war is taking place, it prevents me from volunteering my time at the local homeless shelter. It prevents me from spending time with my widowed neighbor. And it prevents me from spending time helping my friend who's going through a rough patch. Social causes are important, don't get me wrong, but they're abstract and infinite. Too often they're presented as a simple situation in which there is a clear victim and a clear perpetrator. Country A attacked country B unprovoked. However, more often than not, they're much more complex than we're willing to admit. The hashtags and sound bites taken out of context create a version of the problem in our minds, just like Mishkin had a version of Nastasia and Rogojin in his mind. His treatment of them showed that he ignored their personal choices and agency, and instead focused on his altruistic motives. Social media has the tendency to create outrage at systemic issues and ignores the agency of the people affected, just like Mishkin ignored Nastasia's agency when he proposed to her. His ignorance of her personal choices treats her like a child, not a person with freedom. Posting something about someone ignores someone's agency and reduces them to the same level as a child without freedom and responsibility. This is because a social media post interacts with an abstract, one-dimensional image of that issue, not the real issue, which is infinitely more complex than we realize. I think these causes demand actions that won't make a difference, like a certain post, and they detract from actions that will have meaningful impact in the concrete, finite issues that we more often face in our personal lives, like giving a homeless person a sandwich. The social media post will not end the war, but the sandwich will soothe someone's hunger for a bit. The hashtag moves responsibility to some faraway location and makes it useless, whereas the sandwich brings the responsibility and impact home and makes it real. We've been sold a lie that being nice is the same thing as being good. But Mishkin proves that being the purest person in the room can actually make you the most dangerous person in it. When you prioritize an ethereal ideal over the dirty truth, you don't save people. You strip them of their agency and essentially hand them the knife. It is time to stop trading the finite, heavy reality of the person standing in front of you for the infinite, hollow outrage of a hashtag. Stop falling in love with ghosts. Give the real sandwich. Because at the end of the day, it is better to be effective and honest than to be the nice guy who burns the world down just to keep his own halo clean.